This video is going to be going over rhetorical context and the rationale for why we're going to be studying it in this class. So, first of all, you might want to know, what is rhetorical context? Keep in mind the word rhetorical or rhetoric is referring to writing or how people speak. So we're thinking about the context for what's been written or what's been said. So I have a quote here that says rhetorical context refers to the circumstances surrounding any writing situation. So those can be questions that, some of these questions that I put down are: who wrote it? Who published it? Who read it? So these are things that you might be thinking about when you're reading an article, and it's an important thing to think about. Other questions might be: when did the author write it? Where did the author write it? What country or city or state were they writing it in? Why did they write it? And why did people read it? What was happening? Or what did they write about, and what else is happening in the world that is connected to this writing? So we're thinking about all these different ideas that are connected to why this writing came about, and then also you can think about, how did people respond, or how did they expect people to respond to this writing? So that's what we're thinking about when we're looking at a rhetorical context. And you may think, well, why do I need to know what rhetorical context is? Why am I studying this? And one of the big reasons that should motivate you is the WPA. So San Diego State WPA requires you to analyze an article and take into consideration the rhetorical context in which the article was written. So who wrote it, who read it, things like that. Also, this is an important skill for everyday reading, so that if you read an article, you can think about whether or not these claims are good. These are types of questions that will help you think about whether or not the article you're reading is credible. Another reason to think about rhetorical context is this is something that develops critical thinking. It forces you to ask questions that maybe lead to other questions, and continue asking those questions till you really understand why something was written, who wrote it, so that way you can make a good judgment about whether what you're reading is a good source to think about or not. So those are some of the reasons, and I want to talk a little bit more about the WPA. So this is the prompt. I've written it on this screen right here, and it's from the WPA website. Whenever you're taking the WPA, the writing test that all San Diego State students have to take, whenever you're taking it, this is going to be the prompt. What will change is the article, but you will always have to answer this prompt. Identify and provide a brief explanation of the author's argument. Identify 2 persuasive strategies that the author uses to support his or her argument, and analyze how those strategies might persuade the reader to support the claim. Discuss the assumptions on which the argument is based, and evaluate the extent to which the reader would find the argument convincing. So if you look at this, you can see that what we have to do is we have to think about the author. We have to think about the content of the article. We have to think about the reader. And the other things, such as the larger context and the purpose of the author writing the article, are going to help us out with the other things that the prompt requires, such as identifying the argument and identifying strategies and assumptions. So this is identifying the rhetorical context is going to be really helpful for when you're reading the WPA. Another way that the WPA gets broken down on their website is by looking at these questions. So you will not be given these questions on the WPA. You will only get the prompt. So let's look at some of these questions, because these are some good questions to help you think about and help you answer the specific parts of the WPA. So the first question is, who is the specific audience for this article? Who is the author trying to persuade with his or her claim? What is the author's purpose for writing the article? Why does the author want the reader to know? What does the author want the reader to know, believe, or do? Why? So these 2 specific questions, the audience and the purpose, directly relate to the rhetorical context that we're learning about and trying to unpack at this moment. The other questions are also helpful and definitely connected to rhetorical context and require you to establish the rhetorical context before you move on to answering these questions. So let's look at these other two questions. Do the rhetorical appeals or strategies the author uses effectively persuade the reader to agree with the author's claim? Why or why not? What does the author expect the reader to know, believe, or value that is relevant to the argument? Is this a reasonable expectation or assumption? So these are, those last two questions are definitely, you can find them as you look at the main prompt and see how these questions came from the main prompt. And this video will not focus on these last two questions. We're not going to talk about strategies or assumptions or things like that. But what we are going to talk about are the things before that. So the author, the audience, things like that. So let's go ahead and get to it.